Prepare for launch in 3,
Hello and welcome to the Citizen Situation, the Star Citizen podcast in which we, your hosts, address Cloud Imperium games and the Star Citizen community openly and critically. To do this, each episode we debate a topic around Star Citizen. In doing this, we will address the issues, state our minds, debate them, and finally close off with our thoughts for possible solutions. As always, it is our aim to see Star Citizen succeed, and a key part of making that happen is in our belief to offer clear and constructive criticism. So now, without further ado, I will allow the hosts to introduce themselves, starting with Asuna.
Hi, I'm Asuna. I'm a concierge level backer. I'm also a volunteer and streamer. I've been playing the game for 4 years and I still love it. And the biggest part for me is playing with other people.
Nice.
And up to Traz.
Hey community, Traz Ion here, founder of the Ready Player One Facebook group. I work on a variety of other Star Citizen related projects, lifelong gaming enthusiast, and I just want to see Star Citizen come to success. I kind of find myself coming abreast some concerns a lot lately, and so here I am being, a salty citizen. But anyway, that's me in a nutshell. And so Carde, take it away, brother. Before I blur out to nowhere.
Yeah, your camera's a little bit blurry, yes.
Yeah.
Nothing we can do about it right now.
Sorry.
It is what it is. Well, I am Carde. I've been a backer since the Kickstarter days, with concierge levels. Also volunteer at CIG events for 3 years. Pretty much been a gamer since when I could get away with it. And I'm also a lover of science fiction and also some fantasy, and I've been writing for 15 years. Especially in science fiction, but also some fantasy. So, yeah, story is for me always a very high priority, along with then the setting and characters. So, that's us. With that out of the way, let's go into our first point for this show, or well, the only point perhaps. Our topic will be ship customization, modularity, and variants. This is a topic that has seen constant debate. It's always been around in one way or the other. And things seem to have changed in both function and meaning. Some people see broken promises, others see natural evolutions of ideas, and some as always will be in the middle of it all. To start it off with, from my personal perspective, I see indeed that certain things that have originally been promised and that have now fairly seemingly have gone away. I never had much of an issue with it because my personal preference for ships has always been ships that have been designed towards a certain purpose. So a ship that was designed to be more modular and be able to switch between roles has had less appeal to me. And also just from a bit of a immersion standpoint, also say from a realism standpoint, like if you're going to look at a car, like generally brands, especially in some of the higher end cars, you will have cars that go from a very basic in the same model to some high end sport versions and all in between. So you could say like, yes, they're modular, but the amount that has to be done to change from one of those to another is fairly substantial and not as easy as plugging and playing a few components. So that's the way I look a little bit at these things. Traz, how about you?
Well, I mean, I hear and understand like the point you were making about ships being, if you're making a comparison to modern vehicles, that they're generally very limited in their ability to be changed out. Like, I mean, you can just change out minor things. You can change out the tires. You might be able to super mod the engine, which is an internal component. So from a game standpoint, you'd probably never see it, and that's kind of the way we have it in Star Citizen now. There are certain components that are under the hood, and all of that. But I disagree in the sense that I think that a big part of video games, or games at least, is that you will have, you can potentially have more modularity, because it's just like looking at the difference between old world manufacturing versus, or I guess what you cottage industry versus more modern times where everything is modular. Like you can walk into a warehouse and they can, set up assembly lines and machines, and then program it, and so that it builds completely different things. And if you have to retool an entire factory, it may not be an easy thing, but it's definitely something we can do. I guess I would extrapolate that in the future, 900 years, that ships would be akin to that. At the very least, whether it's realistic or not, I think that it was pitched to us as a core part of the game experience. Therefore, I believe it's important. I guess that would just be my opening. So I don't know. Asuna, what do you think?
Well, for me, it's
what does it mean to you?
I do hope there's some modularity. I know that ship components like engines inside of the engine hull, cannons, coolers, those can be changed or improved just like real life.
Sure.
What I don't see now is stuff changing, like changing my seat out. Maybe on a different seat with leather on it, just because it looks cool.
Right.
That stuff I would like to see. Painting my ship in a different color, putting decals on it. I just want my ship to be a little bit more unique looking.
Right.
It doesn't have to be different modular rooms inside the ship, because that does take up a little bit of space. Doesn't, for me, it makes the ship feel less unique, and less role specific. And a role specific ship is generally better at its job. So I hope there is some modularity in Star Citizen to a certain degree, like changing seats, or as I recently talked about, changing the colors of the ship state, of the lights of in the ship state. So that's basically my opening.
It's like, to clarify, like I'm not saying I don't want modularity. Like, I very much like modularity, but to me it's like I like the modularity in essence, like what some of the things that we're seeing, like you can plug and play in certain different systems, engines, power plants, cooling units, weapon systems, things like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like, as you said, we are in a futuristic setting. So I can understand, like, to a certain degree, if you have a ship, it will have like a certain amount of power line capabilities, data capabilities, and stuff like that within it. And within those limitations, you can plug and play in different components, because I assume there will be a fairly high degree of standardization. Because otherwise, you would, if you had an Origin chip, I could only buy components that were designed for an Origin chip, and that's not what we're having right now. So assume indeed we have a fair amount of standardization. So that's a degree of modularity like I see already happening and see to be in place. But there's also like the modularity what they have with with like really changing the entire function of ships by just dropping out some modules and installing some other things. The Vanguard series, for example, was one of those examples in that. And that to me is, I don't really see that as the most useful and most likely solution, or it's also not something I would deem required, but that's my feeling on it. Like, this is also the reason why the Endeavour, for example, to me is not very appealing, because yeah, you can install all these different modules, but where am I going to store these modules? How am I going to do I like my ship to just be that ship, and I know that ship will do that thing.
To go to that, I do feel like companies like Origin do want to be unique and only have their own stuff. If you look at Apple, it isn't the best, in my opinion, but they have a certain style that they have across all the items they have. And I see Origin kind of as the same. We're unique, we're luxury, and this is what we have, and we can guarantee this quality because it's on our own stuff.
Don't die.
Sorry.
I know. I know. Maybe Apple isn't the best comparison, but I see Origin as a very luxury company that likes to keep their stuff, and not have any other company on their ships.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Like it's the comparison.
Yeah, but
like,
I think there's one issue with that. Sorry, Traz. Like, it's a tech company versus generally what do you install Citadel? Chris always said, like, he likes to compare the companies to car companies. And that's an entirely different thing than like an Apple. Because if like you're going to compare Apple versus a McLaren, if I go to a McLaren dealership, I tell them I want that car. And the first thing they will ask you is, how do you want it? Because you can literally put on a car that costs maybe $2,000, you can put $2,000 of options. You can have some weird S paint scheme. You can different interiors. You can have your engine like all of these things can be configured in every single possible way. And in fact, if you want to be a well-valued customer, you're going to be ordering your cars in a very specific configuration that you like.
I do.
So I think with an Origin, like if I would be going to Origin and I'm ordering my Origin 890 Jump, I would like to have it configured to my taste.
Sure.
But there's a difference between, and that's a difference between like ordering a luxury item and ordering a functional tool. Because when I'm going to say, if I'm going to buy an ex-military hammerhead, then I'm going to get what I'm going to get. But even if I'm going to buy a new one, H is probably going to say, yeah, this is the hammerhead. Do you want it? Yes or no?
I'm going to murder my camera. Before you go on, I was going to say something that the three of us may want to address is that within the community, there's a lot of confusion in terminology between, like, when you say modularity, it means 10 different things to 20 different people. And, there's been confusion about the difference between what is variant, what does that mean with ships? There's a difference between modularity between like, well, it's modular because you can change out the weapons. Well, I mean, that is true, but that's not usually what modularity means in the vernacular of backers when we speak to modularity. There's modularity in a ship as in like the Avengers were originally talked about, they might be able to swap out the internals so that you could, strip out the bounty hunter pods and turn it into a Titan. Right, but that doesn't look like it's going to be the case, but that's for later. And then you have like the Vanguard, which very specifically says that you can internally swap out those internal points. Furthermore, they had, customer service, like Ben Lesnick had actually at one point in time responded to me and said something about, the hull of the ship would be locked. So in other words, if you had, say, the Freelancer Miz, and it has that entire chassis on the back with the missile launching system, that couldn't be changed out. But you could take the engines off of a Max, plug those on. You could take the sensors and the fuel drop tanks off of the Duration and throw those on, and you could just make a hybrid monstrosity. So I think, so modularity means a million different things. Some ships, they're sold on it, like the Endeavor. And then with the new technology that they did with the Freelancer, they'd even talked about, at least at the developer side of things, maybe for backers later in the future, they would actually be able to change out the central body. So you might be able to take the central elongated body of the Phoenix and then slap the front end of the Aquila if you liked that rounded, more visibility front end on. And then you could take, maybe the engines or something for something else. The thing is right. So
I think
it's an option if you know.
Before we go into options, like if we want to clarify what these things are, like modularity, I think would be best classified indeed as you're changing fundamental things on your ship, like you changing indeed you're dropping out the entire center section of a warden. That's what I would classify as modularity.
What do you think? Is that good for you too?
Huh?
Is that good for you? Is that like if we say modularity and we're talking about the internal function of the ship?
I feel that modularity is the entire thing, like big and small changes.
Okay, well, shouldn't we? I mean, well, I think that we should.
There are parts that are like maybe a bit too difficult to do, like taking an entire section away from a ship might be difficult to do for them. But I also know that if you look at the Andromeda and Aquila, they actually made the ship in 3 parts. So it should be possible for them to make the front end of a Phoenix and the rest of the section maybe in Aquila. Because I know it's made in 3 sections.
Yeah, then I think that would be indeed qualified as modularity, because I think changing out weapons and engines and stuff like that it's not really a modularity, it's your equipment swaps.
Sure.
That's like, if I take in a car, like Australians are generally famous for it, they love to put different engines in their cars. So are you talking then about, if you're talking about modularity, or are you talking about I'm just switching out the equipment of this car, like I'm putting in a different engine so it has more power? I think that's a modularity one. It can be tricky in that aspect. So it could cover indeed changing out something like engines or just changing out the entire midsection. But I think for clarity behind this, like if we say modularity is changing out indeed very large functions, like changing out the 600i between the touring and the exploration.
It should be possible.
Should it be possible? That I would say would be classified as modularity. Swapping out guns and engines, stuff like that, I would just consider that equipment changements.
I think it's a complex enough subject that maybe even trying to define it right here and now is not going to work for us. Yeah. So maybe at each point, let's move on to the any examples that we do, make sure you clarify what segment you mean. Right. That way, any of our listeners, they know what we're talking about.
Okay. So for the other clarification, variants, which is of course also one of the well-known ones, that's like literally talking a 300i to a 315p to a 325a. That's, I think, would say the same as with a car. Like if you have a BMW 5 Series, you can have a very basic one, you can have a diesel one, you can have an M Series one, but the core behind all of them is still this BMW M5.
Sure.
Which is not always the case for Star Citizen, though.
Right. Like they kind of made a mistake, I believe, when they labeled them all variants, because they weren't. They were a series of ships. The only variant in the 300 line was originally the 350R, the Racer, because it had the twin engines. It was a completely different external geometry. And the brochure sold it that way, but we can talk about that later. But for today's purpose, if we say variant, leave it to the speaker to define what they mean.
Yeah, okay.
It'll get crazy otherwise, man.
True that. And of course, customization is quite literally changing out the colors, changing lighting, but I would also include in that changing out your internal seats.
Yeah, I agree with this, and I hope they let us do that. I mean, I hope we can. I hope the game can support that.
As I said, like with the Origin example, like honestly, I demand almost that level, because I'm gonna buy a freaking luxury yacht. If you're gonna go to anybody that sells luxury yachts, they are gonna okay, we have generally some basic designs for this is what the hull is gonna look like, and some structural things you cannot change, but everything else, whatever the fuck you want.
I want to make a weird comparison, and that's to one of the MMOs that play a sword or another weapon. And you can change the style of the weapon, you can change the colors of the weapon, and then there are enhancements, so that's changing the weapon even more. And then there's traits for that weapon that changes the weapon even more. And you can take traits from one weapon to another, or an enhancement from one weapon to another. So it's like you have a basic hull or the basic weapon, and you can change it however you like to make it more unique. to make it more yours.
It's
right
like the
now
cosmetic versus the functional, right?
It's both cosmetic and functional, and
that's what makes it tricky.
For Star Citizen ships, it's not the same for every ship. Some ships can change a lot, and some can't. So.
Yeah. Well, so the question then is so now that we've kind of talked a little bit about modularity in general, what is the controversy? Because I mean, we've had some recent reverse the verses and some recent callbacks to the devs where they've talked about skinning and some light flare in ships, and you had linked that to me earlier, right?
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. I know I watched a reverse the verse where they briefly talked about like space stations being potentially owned. That was another person in the MMHC community who linked that to me in regards to this topic. And while talking about like owning stations and running them isn't necessarily related to our modularity, the conversation that that Todd Pappy was having and some of his points about design and not necessarily knowing the left and right limits yet of modularity, limiting what they can say they will or won't do, I thought that was pretty relevant here. But what is the burning fire in the community that's regarding this? I mean, to you guys, what do you guys think?
I think the burning fire is, I mean, yeah, it's a bit of repetition, but it's also a lot of confusion. What was being meant? What is what we're gonna get? Like as I said, like to some people, a variant is not a variant, but it's modularity of the base design and other way around. And
what I want is CIG. It would help the community a bit. Make a new post about modularity, variants, and bugs, and talk about all the ships and if it's a variant, if it's a bug, can it be changed between them? Like, yeah, can I put the engine from one variant to another?
For an example here, like for what confusion can be, taking the Hornet series, the oldest ship that we have. I got an FC7 Hornet. I've got an FC7 Hornet Wildfire. I've got an FC Hornet Ghost, and I got a Tracker, and you got the Super Hornet, and you got the military spec Hornet. Mm-hmm. Which of these is a variant, and which of these would you classify under modularity of the base variant?
You want the base version, or should I?
No, you go.
Okay. So the F7CM or Super Hornet is the only actual variant because it is the only one that has a geometry difference, not counting the unreleased F7CA or military version that the UE is supposed to have, and we've never actually gotten that. The F7C, the basic body type, is supposed to be the exact same body that the Tracker uses, the exact same body that the Stealth uses, and the exact same body that the Wildfire uses. However, and this is where I feel like controversy could have been headed off, or at least I feel like the kinds of transparency that I expect and want from CIG that I'm not getting is in regards to when they have ships like that for years they've sold us on how you can change out the ball turrets, you're supposed to be able to change out the stealth arm, you're supposed to be able to change out the sensors, and you can mix and match and throw in the cargo pod to do whatever. And you can do that between the F7, the Super Hornet, and the regular Hornets, because the only difference with it is that it has a two-seater. It doesn't change its other hard points. However, then they released a year and a half ago, they released this design series where they addressed exactly like Asuna, you were asking about them putting out documentation where they clarified all these confusions. Well, they did that, except that it didn't really clarify any confusions, because those of us who's followed the game for a long time instead saw, I don't know if it was just because the author of the documents was maybe not as versed in the history of the ships, so maybe they made some mistakes, or if these were designers and these new statements that went against everything that we knew thus far were in fact indicative of a new design direction. And we never got clarity, because all we got were one lines where things were changed. Because, for instance, from that document, it stated that the Wildfire was in fact a true variant. And while during the actual sale of the Wildfire and all of those hero ships, they were termed hero ships, it was clarified repeatedly and asked repeatedly that those ships were not variants. They were just skin and weapon loadout changes. Yet here we are a year and a half after that, or a year later, now we're told that no, the Wildfire is actually a variant. So what does that mean? Does that mean when then you go and you compare that ship on the ship matrix page and you look at what it says there? I mean, we all know the ship matrix page is questionable, but that's supposedly been improved and locked in. So why is it that when you go there now, the only difference you can see that it looks like what would be locked in is like the ball turret? Does that mean you can't pull the ball turret out? Does that mean that the Super Hornet can't remove its ball turret? I mean, are you... Because we also know that when you play in the game itself, now it's alpha. We know it's not final. They change things, they break things, they fix things. You can look at the flash fire mounts for the Super Hornets or for the Hornet series and the flash fire mounts for the Cutlass, and you can see they worked, then they didn't work, then they worked again, and then they didn't work. So we can't really go to that as a source for what the actual developer's intentions are. And so here we are, years later, and we know this much information. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. Is it a variant? Is it not? I don't know.
Well, the one interesting one in this list for me really was the Ghost. Because the Ghost was originally listed as having actually absorbent material on the hull structure. Like, that was part of its why it would be stealthier.
Right.
I mean, to be frank, like, if you look at the thing, there's no way the thing's going to have any... Like, the radar signature of it's going to be absolutely enormous because, well, look at the design of it. But that material was supposed to be part of the reason why it was more stealthier.
Sure. The Delta had something like that.
Which still has to be implemented.
Yeah, which still has to be implemented. But then, can I put that on... If I have an F7C, can I go to my Anvil dealership and say, give me that stuff they put on the Ghost? Or will they say, like, no, those are different panels entirely, so you have a completely different skin on the structure of your ship, and we can't change that out?
I think Asuna touched on the solution to what I think we as backers deserve, that was
one document with all bugs, like for the Vanguard, and variants, and modularity. Yeah, and then mention every ship. Like, I see the 600i. If you've seen the exploration module in it, you know it can be swapped out for the luxury module pretty easily, just the same way as the Vanguard would work. Other ships might be a bit more difficult to change it out that easily. So talk about mention every ship. Is it a variant, and is it a variant of what? What is it modularity, and what will be swapped out?
Yeah,
when you go to the ship matrix page, there should be a slot listed for armor. It doesn't matter that it's not implemented in the game yet. I shouldn't have to go back to a Q&A for a ship sale from 3 or 4 years ago and then read in that ship sale that it says this ship is heavily armored. Yeah. Okay, so because for instance it says that about the Vanguard Harbinger. However, if you look at the ship stat page, there's no inclusion on that. So if you're going strictly on the stats that are presented to us on that stat page, you're not seeing a complete picture. But since they've made no mention about their intentions to continue to develop an armor system where armor is something that people can change out, like, I have no faith that that's not just going to be another feature that's dropped. Because if you look at other ships, and this is one of those things where, like, you don't want to spread FUD, right? Fear and uncertainty. You don't want to spread that. But the lack of, I guess, design intention, reaffirmation, and information coming out of CIG when it's regarding some of these systems spreads it, because I just don't know. And but you want me to back and support and spend money. Well, I need to know a little bit more, I
think it's what Asuna said, isn't it? It's going to be a really good one. Just take each of the ships and just make clear, like, this is either like the F7C to the F7C Wildfire, yet the only difference is cosmetic in the skin and in equipment. As a result, like, the changes are maybe modular because I can change them out in between these two ships, like they're interchangeable. But I'm looking at an FC7 Ghost, that you may say, like, yeah, this is actually a variant because while certain components can be switched out, the actual hull plating of the ship is not interchangeable. So that's why we list this as a definite variant and not just a modular variation, say, of the other ship. So that would really help out a lot. Now, in regards, it's like for what do we want modular? What systems, what things do we want to be modular? What do we want to be customizable? Of course, there's also going to be a lot of things. Like some people will not give a damn about anything that is like of the interior. Yeah, your camera just hates you.
Sorry guys, I'm getting a new camera between now and the next show. It's done.
I forgot to turn off Steam, so I'm getting Steam notifications over my webcam.
Brilliant. But yeah. As I'm saying, like the clarity in that, but also like what do we want? Like to me, I don't see the ability to change that armor happening. Because to me, armor on most ships is going to be relatively integrated into the structure of the ships. Yeah, so that's probably going to be too much. I mean, I would say something that I see. A core level. Yeah. But like, I mean, they had talked about they even did concept art showing like little hex armor up armoring on a Hornet, which is pretty cool because in the real world they do that with tanks. Like you can add additional armor to a tank. You can add additional armor is something else. Wait. That's the point. Like additional armor is something else. Then you're adding something on top of what is there. You're not changing what is there. You're adding something on top of it. That's the difference again between is the armor modular, and the fact that armor would be modular would be I can take off the armor that is there and I can put in something else, or is the armor non-modular but I can add something to the armor. Right. Two entirely different things. It can vary from ship to ship, absolutely. I mean, there are some ships that no, you can't add extra armor, but it would be nice if they were at least clear with us. Is there going to be a baseline hull value? Yeah, is it going to be different? They talk about physicalized damage, and I mean, is that no longer a thing? Like, Asuna also wanted to jump.
So it's hard to just say, okay, this is the armor level, because armor would vary between point and point on a ship. Like the armor might be different on one place. And they also talked about like the Banu merchantman, you can add deflective armor that would stop scanning. Yeah, like you can add onto the ship or inside the ship to block the scanning, so you can make it a true smuggling ship. But that's adding armor. That's just a bunch of feathers. They just take a bunch of feather pillows and stuff the cargo hold around.
This is indeed quite interesting because, okay, you go a little bit into the theory crafting aspect in that, but it makes a lot of sense that armor is going to be different around ships. Like for a fighter, most of the armor realistically is going to be around the pilot. Like if you look at the A-10, for example, as a ground attack aircraft, like that thing is going to get shot at a lot. So what did they do? They literally put the pilot in an armored titanium bathtub. Like that's where a lot of the armor is located around, because that's what's the most important thing, the pilot. If you're looking at larger ships, like if you look like these days, of course, naval ships are not armored anymore. But if you go back to World War II era designed ships, then you would be talking about an all or nothing armor scheme, which was literally like, if it was not important, there was no armor. If it was important, there was really thick armor. So indeed, it will be dependent likely on the ship, because make no mistake, if we're having a flight model that keep all of your mass in check, adding armor on your ship is also going to drastically change how it's going to fly.
Sure. And I think when it comes to those kinds of things, they don't necessarily need to do geometry changes. I mean, it could be as simple as you just pick it in the menu and it's another one of those invisible numbers that you get to change. But it would be nice to know whether or not we're going to have that option. So you can buy maybe deflective armor or reflective for versus energy, and
lore-wise, actually, you can do that very easily. Make it invisible. Because if you look at, for example, a Challenger Mark 1 main battle tank, the silhouette that you see is literally the cosmetic armor. That's how it's named, because it's just steel plating. All of the armor actually is hidden below that, and it's mounted upon the actual structure of the tank. So you never actually see the armor. You just see some cosmetic appearance on top of the armor. So you could just have it that the top layer of this thing is just a very thin cosmetic layer, and the actual function of the armor is hidden behind it.
So, armor and this discussion and everything else is still just one small part of the overarching whole modularity. I feel like some of the biggest changes that I'm not super ecstatic about is seeing ships that were originally pitched and sold as defined by the equipment that you put on the ship being converted from that to specific bespoke variants that now have different hard point sizes, different limitations. And you combine that with the fact that they've, in a couple of places on video, have said that now, whereas before, I don't know if everybody's aware, but a quick overview: components, shields, power plants, coolers, radar, all those things, not all of them are implemented, but the ones that are implemented, all of those items fall under different categories. Those categories are, civilian, industrial, performance, stealth, and military. Now, each of those categorizations only define how those items basically perform, how quickly they wear out, how much maintenance they need, maybe how resilient they are. There's a bunch of different metrics, and the whole idea was, and this is the core of what Star Citizen was and what Chris Roberts pitched to us early on. And I mean, I got it, room for change, but I mean, the pitch is that the game was going to be balanced around the idea of paper, rock, scissors. No matter what kind of setup you went for, there was no one I win component. It didn't matter if you had the most expensive hot rod and you had decked it out with all the best gear. If you did all the best stealth gear, yeah, you might be great at stealth, but if you got caught with your pants down, or you gave away your thing, you're in trouble because you don't have the performance. If you go with a full military kit out where, oh my God, in a dogfight, you're just going to be the devil. The problem is if somebody's got the fuel redundancy to outlast you, your components are going to burn up fuel too quickly, and you're not going to be able to range very far from your carrier or whatever.
Or you're likely less endurance in the parts, so you need to replace parts more often.
Yeah, it was all paper, rock, scissors built into the modules themselves, meaning that you could take any platform, any ship, and based on how you modularly kitted it out, you would change the performance characteristics of that ship. The 300 series is a perfect example of this. The 300i, P, and Alpha were all the same body. The 350R had a different body. It had twin engines, so it was faster, and had no cargo. However, even in the brochure, it stated that even the 350R had all the same hardpoints and could switch in all the same weapons and all the same modules. So again, if you wanted to take the racer body and try to turn it into a combat ship, you could. I mean, it may have a weaker hull because that's tied to the hull. It might have had, maybe it didn't have the up armor options because, that doesn't come stock with the racer body. And you never would have the cargo, of course.
May not even have been possible because they would have used a lighter structure for the racer.
Right, so, exactly.
May I?
But here's the thing
let him finish and then we go.
I'm just wrapping up that point. That's the thing is when they released those documents that talked about defining variants and modularity and fuel and cargo, they did these documents like a year and a half ago, the shipyard documents. There's a couple of lines in there that completely undermine what the 300 is. And when I read it, I was like, oh, whoever wrote this must not know what they're talking about because that's not what I bought. That's how, and we're not talking about the kinds of things that change. I mean, in the course of game development, you're going to change features maybe. You might change like weapon balance and things like that. But we're talking about a core design philosophy. And by taking the 300 series and making them bespoke, unique variants, you throw that out. And now basically each one of them is an individual ship. So no longer can you buy one ship and use it as a platform and change out gear based on what you want to do in a given day. Now you got to buy 3 ships or 4 ships, depending on how you look at it. It's that I found was frustrating because what does that say about all the other ships that are supposed to be multi-role functioners, I mean, are we going to see the same thing happen because the bucks were so confusing and hard to implement with the Vanguard? It seems like the Avenger is no longer going to be able to swap out its internals. What about the constellations?
we get the point. Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
So
tricky.
basically, we have hull modularity, component modularity, and interior modularity. Like that's like the seats, and then component modularities. Basically, power plants, coolers, etc. And then the hull modularity can be engines or entire ship parts like Buck. And then we have the hull itself and parts of it that can't be changed. And that makes a ship different from another ship. And if you're talking about modularity, it's like the entire group. So if you say one ship is can take all the items from another ship, then you're talking about all those parts. But what parts are that? Are that the engines of the ship? Or are that only interior stuff? Or is it only components?
Right.
Just like the 300i, can I take the engines from the 350? Was 350, right? Can I take those engines to the other ship? Or is it only interior? Is it only components?
Yeah, I think that comes also down to, like, indeed, certain things have been promised in that aspect, and I completely understand that. Well, I also like to do, go big into the theory castings, like, how has a ship been built? Like, if you're going to look at lore-wise, like, sure, if they had sold it in a certain way, they should have, I think you're fairly right in saying they should have just kept that feature in there. So, like, I can swap things in and out. If you're looking at the 300 series, like, yeah, I should be able to turn my 300i into a 325A, provided I put in certain of the upgrades. And maybe I would lack out some of maybe additional armor or something that it would not have because it's more closely tied towards the structure, and to change that out would maybe still be possible, but you would really need to send it to a place where they can perform certain upgrades, and it would be a more permanent sort of upgrade and not something you could do in your own garage with a few tools, as an example. If you're then looking at a 350R, because we're looking at a completely different hull and structure, because they said that, like, this thing was built to be lightweight. So yeah, sure, maybe I can still add the weapon systems to it, and I should have plenty of power because I got a lot more powerful engines out there, so likely I should have the juice to power them. That should not really be an issue. But I don't have the armor systems, and maybe maybe to plug in additional sensor systems, I would have to sacrifice something else, you name it. But if you're just going to say, indeed, like, we're not going to allow you to change, I'm not going to make my 300i into 315p by adding a tractor beam and plugging in some extra sensors, right, and changing out the engine for the more efficient one, then yeah, I think you're going too far in restricting people as in what is possible.
I have a follow-on question to that. There was an episode of ATV, and it's 6 months, 9 months ago, I don't know, longer, where one of which designer was it? I'd recognize him, but I can't think of his name. Anyway, he spoke to this idea that, you remember how I talked about how there's different types of components? There's, military, there's civilian, there's industrial, and each one of them have different traits. Well, I guess somebody had asked, I think it was Disco or something, had phrased a question from the community, and his response was that in the future they would limit it by hull type. In other words, if his specific example was if you were flying an 85X, you weren't going to be able to equip military components inside of that. And if you were flying a Herald, you weren't going to be able to equip stealth components with that. That right there, I think, was the beginning of where I found myself becoming frustrated with, I guess, because what do you guys think about that? Because, I mean, I know what I
understand think. I can understand some aspects of it from a lore perspective. There are certain limitations that make sense, as in perhaps, certain connections and stuff like that will be limited, like, a military component will need to use a different type of connections than, say, a industrial component would, or something else. I see
a power plant's not a power plant. I mean, we've been sold the whole idea that power plant is a power plant.
No.
But then now,
but here's
this power
example.
Plant is military spec'd. Now that's different.
First, let me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. what I'm trying to say is like, if you look at the requirements right now, between say a hose fitting on a civilian car versus a hose fitting on the same type of car, like maybe a Land Rover, you look at the requirement for a civilian requirement for that fitting and what the military wants for that fitting. It's very likely that the military is going to say, if you take the civilian quality parts on that, they say like, we don't accept that. Those parts are not going to last. They're not living up to our expectations. We need to have these and these things in there.
I mean,
so lore-wise, I can see certain limitations in there. And also, but I also think like, do you really need those limitations? Because if you're looking at a Herald and stealth components, like the Herald, the whole design of the ship, it's a giant freaking engine. You can put as much stealth components on the thing as you want. The difference is going to be so minuscule. It's not going to be worth putting the stealth components on there. So you're not going to do it.
Derived from the components themselves.
Your balance should be, it's simply your incentive. You're like, that's why I don't understand the FC7 Hornet Ghost, because the whole ship the whole design of the Hornet is as unstealthy as you can be. So to me, I never understood that design, even when they launched it originally. So I think that's where you should keep your balance in, and that's why, like, let people do whatever the hell they want. Right. Like, if people want to be idiots, let them be idiots.
I see a use for the Ghost, actually. Like, you have a pilot that's good in fighting in a Hornet. It's easier for that pilot to get used to the Ghost than it is to say a Saber pilot to get used to a Ghost.
Yeah, but the point of a Ghost is that of stealth is that you're not going to be seen. Like, you're going to perform certain different roles. So, like, if you need somebody to do that, like, put somebody in a ship that's designed for it and have them trained for that. That's the same reason if you're looking at any pilot right now. A pilot is trained to fly a certain type of aircraft. There are very, very few pilots around that are certified to fly more than one type of aircraft. The simple reason being is that indeed the controls are all different. They can make mistakes even though they are certified to that aircraft, because, you're flying a Boeing 737 all the time, and now you suddenly have to fly a Boeing 747. Okay, it's a much different plane. Like, I can make a mistake because I'm so used to my 737 and not to my 747. But that's one of the reasons. But again, if the ship is not suited for a role, then why bother with it? Like, the F-67 Hornet is an official variant, which I don't understand. But even if you had taken any other, like if you had taken the Herald and decided I want to make a stealth Herald, then it's not really going to do much.
Right.
So why bother?
I think it should be in the player's hands.
Yeah, it should be in the player's hands in that aspect. Like, as I can understand from law reasons certain limitations. I mean, you can even make it so that, like, the law states you're not allowed to put military-grade connections on ships that have not been cleared.
Then it should be a black market option.
Yeah, it should be a black market option even. But if I have a black market option, then likely it's going to be a more fragile, maybe perhaps not very stable connection. So things can go wrong with that.
I want to disagree on a part you said earlier about the military doesn't accept certain parts. But that's the military, where other people, we can choose. Like, if we're using, like your example, a hose that's not military grade and used on a military item, that hose will degrade faster. That military item will probably not work as well. But that's the choice you make. And maybe I put a military grade power plant in my ship. It will have a different weight, maybe, and that will affect my ship. But that's my choice to take.
Yeah, I said that's why I'm saying that's the difference between. Like, that's difference between, like, your game desires and what you want to, if you want to write things in from a lore perspective.
Right.
That's just like, I write a lot. So if there are certain limitations, like if from a game design standpoint, I want this limited, I like to think about, okay, how could I make this limited within the lore? Like, can I give reasons for certain things to be limited? That's where I'm coming from in that aspect. Like, I'm not saying it should be, I'm just saying it could be for these reasons.
What do you guys think about it as far as from a game design standpoint? Specifically, I mean, the fact that we have, 140 ships that are flyable right now, various variants, and the idea that manually they're going to balance ships by putting in arbitrary limitations on what components can and cannot fit ship by ship. I mean,
Depends on
seems
the
like a
size
lot
of
of
the. It depends on the size of the component, but that's also a thing we have now, like a size for a gun. It might be too big for a certain ship.
No, you misunderstand me. Hang on. I meant in the sense of them saying that you can't fit, assuming all the same size. Like, say you have 5 ships that can all fit the same component, but they're going to say that this ship over these 3 ships can't fit military. These 2 ships can't fit industrial.
Oh no, I
this
find
ship
that
can
stupid.
only fit civilian. What's that?
I find that stupid. Like, it might not work as well. It has a trade-off if you use one component with another, but that's our choice to make.
Right.
Okay.
That was your pitch too.
From a game design perspective, I would say let us make the choice. From a lore perspective, I do like the idea of certain limitations because it means you have to play around with it. So
what about if you looked at it from, instead of looking at it from like a car hose on the internals of an engine, what if you looked at it like a computer, like when you're building a computer? We have so much standardization now that when you say that, oh, well, maybe this socket CPU doesn't fit on that motherboard, that would be the difference between going between a small ship and a medium ship and a large ship. They have different size components, so you already have some limitations there. But when you're talking about all ships that all fit small components, they should all be able to interchange, because it's just like using, different...
Not really, because even if you look at your modern computer and you say, like, well, if I have a ship with, I have an Intel motherboard and I have an AMD CPU, I can't plug it in.
That's 2.
No, that's 2. But also, like, maybe difference in ages, and also, like, if you're looking at certain things, like, there are certain type of connectors and things like that are used pretty much only by the military, or certain type of connectors are only used by the entertainment industry. Certain type of connectors are only used by industrial sort of stuff. So there is
leftover computers. We don't use the high tech stuff.
No, but there are those limitations are actually there. Like, another silly reason, like, why did so many laptops for such a long time still have VGA connectors? Because office blocks around the world still have so many freaking beamers that work by a VGA connection. Yeah. So they keep those things in there.
Sure.
Well, if you're buying a laptop as a consumer, you don't want a VGA connection because you're never going to use the damn thing.
See, I guess from a lore standpoint, I can understand the justifications. I just think from a game standpoint, on the one hand, it's a game, so either you want it to be fun and modular or you don't.
Yeah, and what I'm saying, from a game, I completely agree it should be there.
Yeah.
And also from purely the point from being Star Citizen and the promises that were made originally, I say keep it in there. Because if you're a good game designer, you can balance those components to get the same results anyway.
Right.
So if I don't want people to plug in a military power plant in an RSI Aurora, I just balance it in a way that it's not incentivizing to put it in there.
Yeah. So you can compare it to MMOs. I might have a helmet, I might have a cuirass and a sword, and maybe the helmet is professional or military grade, and I can tweak it to be even better. But I have the choice to choose what kind of parts I want. I have the choice to have a good quality component and a bad quality component together. I'm not limited.
Yeah. But there's also different quality grades, of course, within each of these different types.
I'm never limited in how I combine it.
Well, that's one of those things. Like, for example, if I have a power plant, like, is my ship going to limit certain power flows, for example, or can you combine certain components?
But that's limiting yourself or having a drawback.
Yeah, but one other thing to consider, actually, because when you say, like, you can mix and match components, like, I get that, like, in essence, that shouldn't really matter all that much. But I also wonder, like, for example, if you're looking at computers, how is the computer going to handle it if I got a civilian-grade Gatling laser on my right wing and a military-grade Gatling laser on my left wing? They're going to have different demands. Is your computer going to go with that?
But that's up to you. If you want to make the choice and have drawback in that case, it's up to you. and that it makes a ship more unique.
Yeah. So I'm willing to concede like it should be there. But I will say one final thing that I will say there are certain limits in. It's like, for example, and especially this comes down to ballistic weapons. Because if you're looking at like, in essence, nothing should stop you from putting certain type of weapons perhaps on certain things. But like ship structure, like a laser weapon, it's not going to have anything. But if I got a ballistic weapon, I do need to account for things like a recoil moment and that sort of stuff. Unless everything are rail guns, but then why do we have full casings for weapons? So that's like I said, from a game science perspective, I like the idea of giving us the free choice. From lore reasons, I can see certain reasons to limit things.
I think my biggest concern is it. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it bothers me because I feel like we were told one thing and now it's being simplified, or is it? If anything, I think another valid concern is the design overhead, because when you develop balance at the component level, then you can make the limitations of a ship based on what hard points it has, how many shields it can fit, all that, and then you can just let it ride, because then it's on the players to work out their optimal loadout for whatever they're trying to do. Right.
And they will.
However, when you as a designer start putting in arbitrary limits, we need to make this ship weaker, so let's go ahead and put in this arbitrary decision that you can't make military components to it. Now you're having to design and balance hundreds of ships. Like we're what, 3 years away of 3 or more years of ship sales to look forward to, and we've already got 150 ships out, and not every even ship is flyable. So how many more once those are all flyable, and they're going to manually go through and individually custom tweak and balance. In my experience, having played other MMOs, like you play old school EverQuest and you've got like 15 classes, 13 races, 17 starting cities. And here's the thing,
look.
Every expansion, EverQuest 1 was a nightmare for the design team to balance at every expansion. It was
look at the current World of Warcraft expansion. It's a freaking mess.
Well, I'm not familiar with the newer.
Yeah, well, it's one of the same things, but
right. The thing is the more ships you have to individually tweak and balance, the more of a nightmare it becomes finding that sweet spot of balance. That's why I believe that it would have been simpler for them to stick with the plan of actually incorporating all the paper rock scissors balance elements within the components themselves. They're just setting themselves up for a nightmare of work to keep up with. Okay. And it limits the players, because now your ships are
we get them.
But I do foresee people commenting and half agree, if you limit a ship more, then it's easier to balance a ship versus another ship. If you know what I mean. It's more, that ship is that, and it won't change much, and another ship, and then it's easier to balance than, let's say, a ship with this item or this item. How will it fare against another ship? This item and this item and this item.
I have a counter for that.
Okay.
It goes by the name of EVE Online. EVE Online, for those of you who don't know, if you have different classes of ships, you have different classes of equipment and all of that, and most ships have, you got 4 different areas in which you can put equipment. Rig slots, low slots, medium slots, and high slots. Generally, high slots are weapons, rigs are just modifications, and your mid slots is propulsion and electronic warfare, but also tanking if you're on a shield ship, and your low shots is mostly tanking or modifiers to weapons and electronic warfare. The balancing that I need to do and the limitations that even are within these certain ships, you always notice, almost instantly people figure out what is the most optimal for a certain type of task. When they introduce their new abyssal systems, the one ship was just clearly this ship is so much better than all the other ships for doing these things. So everybody went with that one ship. And whereas if you would have been balancing purely on a component level, then people would say okay, maybe this ship has a bonus to its drone speed, but this one has drone damage or something like that. There always will be differences between 2 ships, even if you balance on the component level. Maybe one ship has better armor, maybe one ship is the hull is more optimized for stealth and things like that. But if you balance around the component level, then in the end, the ship that has more armor is going to be able to take more hits, but the ship that has more stealth is likely going to get the first shots off. And if they use the same level of equipment, in the end, it's probably going to balance out if you have two equal pilots, because one gets the first shots off, so that reduces the armor advantage. But in return, the other guy's like, yeah, but now we're on an equal playing field because, well, we're both at the same level, sort of health, so to speak, fighting each other out.
Oh, by the way, we're at 1 hour now.
Yeah, that's all right. So that's how I can see that work.
Already an hour?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. Well, so let me. I had a comment from someone out in the community. CZen Star. He's a pretty big backer and super supportive of the game. His comment was, because I had asked the Million Mile High Club community regarding what they thought about modularity, what were their hot button issues, and any things like that. And so the comment I got there was modularity in response to the recent trend in specialist ships is often cited as a sign that CIG has abandoned modularity to chase ship sales. And that is, I mean, I've definitely seen that concern stated before. He does not think that's true because
no, me neither.
Go ahead.
Me neither.
Right.
Come on.
Oh, okay. Because he says that basically the devs continue to mention future work on modularity. He did link me an interesting article where Todd Pappy was talking about owning and running. Yeah. Or Disco was asking Todd Pappy regarding about owning and running stations. And while I don't think that conversation was directly related to our conversation here about modularity, Todd did talk about not knowing the left and right limits of the modular system. Therefore, really they won't necessarily know. So I think there's room there, and I definitely don't think that CIG is,
What I feel is we have had a lot of modular ships in the past, and now they're making more specialized ships. Just like in real life, we have cars that we can change more in cars or vehicles that are more specialized, and it gives another way to play, and those are more efficient, but can change out their stuff as much. So their gameplay is more limited, but they're better in their gameplay.
Yeah. And
it's what I've
never had a problem with the specialized ships coming in. So I agree with him. I don't believe that it's a money grab, but it does frustrate me when they take ships that were already put out as modular and supposed to have flexible roles, and they've kind of simplified those. In that regard, that to me is kind of a problem.
This one brings up an interesting question for me. Like, if we're saying we're balancing around component level, then what use would a specialized ship have?
Because the hull is different.
Well,
yeah, but the hull is in the end only going to make so much difference. Like, if I'm going to balance around my components, so around my sensors, around my engines, my power plants, my weapons, all of the key things that make a ship do a certain thing, then a specialized hull seems to be of less value than a sort of a modular hull.
Depends.
I think go ahead.
Yeah, well, it depends, because some hulls are just made for a certain way of playing. Like an Aurora versus a Saber. The Aurora is more modular than the Saber, but the Saber is made for fighting.
Or the Mustangs would be a more equatable comparison too. Because the Mustang series, every one of the Mustangs is individually unique. Like, the cargo one doesn't do the exploration with its internal body, which doesn't do the same thing as the racer, right? Whereas the Auroras, while there's like 5 or 6 of Auroras, they're all pretty much the same basic frame, and they were supposed to have some function to be, as a starter. I mean, of course, that's very limited, but yeah.
Yeah, I still think it brings in certain bonuses then towards the ship, of course. That, maybe even if you're saying certain things on ship, it sounds like that things maybe you can change out your power plants, but of course they're going to stay large power plants. Your computers are going to stay a certain size of a computer, and that's then how you could balance specialized ships. Maybe a specialized exploration ship will need additional computers and also maybe additional fuel storage. So that's neither way to go.
Right.
As in the point of selling, that's like we're trying to sell additional ships with these specialized ships is like, yeah, I don't really see that one, but I do see the point, like if you're going to take away that modularity from the original modular ships, then it's going to get to the questionable territories again.
I think to talk to the question you were saying earlier too about the difference between specialized and multi-role is I think like a multi-role ship has to be good at most everything, average at some things, whereas a specialized ship is going to be amazing at just one or two or three things at most, and will suffer in other categories. And it'll just come down to the preference of the player. And then there's also the subtleties, like different ships have different cockpits, different looks, different layouts, different things that are annoying. You know, I mean, like, I love the freelancers, but then you get in that cockpit and you're like, man, this view is terrible. You know, I love the way the Xi'an Scout looks. Then you get in the cockpit and you're like, why are these giant vertical bars blocking the view? What is this? You know, it just, so you definitely have the fingerprint of each ship being its own thing. Solution-wise, I was thinking along the lines where you were talking about you liked limitations being in place. So actually, that kind of gave me an idea that I was thinking of. Instead of saying that the Herald or the X-85 can't use stealth or can't use military-grade components, instead, get rid of those new arbitrary limits. But instead, like if you say you have a Class A military-grade computer that's only sold by one in-game brand, maybe that brand only works with these other brands of ships and it's not compatible with Drake or whatever. Like, there are definitely ways for them to limit it in-game, where just like we were saying earlier, you limit it based at the component level. You're going to kill your designers asking them to custom balance every ship by making all these arbitrary rules. Plus, it breaks the whole immersion with the game, because it's like, well, the game's modular, but not really. Like, what?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good thing. Like, another way, like, for example, with the balancing, like, oh yeah, we want this ship to be able to do this, like, we want this fighter to actually be able to do some damage towards a capital ship, for example. Like, yeah, this is going to be a tricky one, but it's just for an example, because that's going to be another one. But like, if I'm going to put, say, 10 size 1 weapons on it, then if size 1 weapons can suddenly damage a capital ship, then I'm doing something wrong. So I should instead, like, okay, so maybe this one fighter will have one really large weapon, only one really large one, because it's designed to hit that ship. But I could also choose to equip it with, I don't know, 2 or smaller ones or 4 smaller ones, and work in a way like that. So it's game design is always a tricky one, of course. It's tricky. Anyhow, and it's solution-wise where we're going on. Yeah. What are the possible solutions to this one? I think before I'm going to go into our general solutions, I think one of the ones that's going to be a reoccurring solution with almost every episode is give us the information. Give us the information in a clear, concise way in a centralized location on your own website. With that one out of the way, what are some other things that we think they could be working on?
There's a lot, but that's for different episodes.
No, but regarding the subject that we have, modularity and things like that. So anything else that you think they should be doing right now?
Talking about upcoming and already flyable ships, how much we can change, like info again. It's can I put a different part from one ship to another? Can I change the touring module on the 600i to the exploration model or the exploration module?
I love it. I love your solution, Asuna. I think if they took the ship matrix and took it to the nth degree, they need to go through, and there needs to be a line for armor, a line from, is this ship modular? Like you were saying, can you swap it? Like everything that's been talked about in any QA ever, that needs to be something that's listed. It doesn't have to be feature complete. It doesn't have to. It could be to be determined. But we just need to know that those things are even being factored in. Like, I mean, because think about it. If you want to be an explorer, it would be nice to know which ships have floodlights, which ships have forward beam lights, or do they not have it at all? Because some ships do and some ships don't. You know, I mean, those are something that should have been modular hard points, but whatever. Anyway,
Sure.
I love that. I hope that if they were to take one thing away, I think that would be more important even than the stuff that drove me nuts with them changing out their design philosophy and walking away from components being the balance factor. Anyways, transparency.
Yeah, transparency, and I do like the idea of like just putting it maybe all in the ship matrix. Maybe you need to find some other way to explain certain things. That's gonna be how you're gonna figure it out. However, if I do agree, like perhaps going back to the component balance would be a really good thing, and also with modularity, like modularity, perhaps it doesn't need to be a box that I drop down and another box that I plug in. Maybe you can also make it so like, well, you can change your 600i Touring to an exploration variant, but you need to bring it to a certified origin dealership. There they can perform this change, and it will take a certain amount of time, and it will cost a certain amount of money. So I can make the change, but it is going to be a little bit more difficult than dropping in a new engine.
But that's what I'm saying. I want to know if I can do it. I'm not asking. I'm not asking them how. I'm just asking them if it's possible to change this part to another part.
Yeah, that's like knowing is nice, but also like one of the suggestions I would offer them is like make it happen, which is also one of my solutions to a lot of the problems. Like it doesn't need to be a drop-in or drop-out solution. There are multiple ways of allowing these certain things, because you can do the same thing with the Avenger. Maybe like those bounty hunter cells, they all need to have power plugged in, they need to be securely attached and things like that. So okay, maybe I don't need to go to an Aegis dealer to have that done, but I need to go to a workshop at least to have that properly done.
And that could be an in-game limiting factor to help balance. Maybe the Avengers are harder to change. You can't do it yourself. But what's amazing about the Buck, the Battlefield upgrade kit that you get as with the Vanguard, is maybe what's fantastic about that is you don't have to go into a shop to do it. As long as you've got it in your hangar or whatever, you can easily swap it out. I mean, those are other great factors.
Because if you design the ship around the Buck, which actually from a military point also makes a lot of sense, because ships are expensive. So if I can change the role of my ship by simply dropping in and dropping out a container, if you can ask anyone in the military, like, you can change your fighter to a fighter bomber to a air superiority fighter or a close air support fighter by dropping in and out a few boxes of the ship. They're all going to be like, sign us up. You know, we want a lot of them.
I have a great example, and that's a Vanguard inside the Bengal. Maybe there's a mission that it needs rockets. They'll drop out one area of the ship. They put in the other module, and that has a different ship. And it's easy to take
it's going to be a must. Because on a carrier, it's like the space savings that you can get from that on a carrier. That's like, God damn it. They would pay 3 times the amount that the stuff is worth just to get a space saving. That's also one limiting factor, by the way. You can make ships that do this kind of stuff, because I assume it will be relatively complex. Because you need plug-and-play connectors for almost everything. You need to have it all wired up that it can handle all those things. So you could say, like, yeah, this is possible, but those kind of ships, they would cost more money because of the additional complexity of making a box system work. So I think those are indeed what I would offer as solutions, like outside of making the information clearly available. It's like just make the modularity available, but put the limiting factors on it by the use of gameplay mechanics, which a little bit would be like additional cost to a ship that can quickly drop in and out certain modules. Or you can say like, yeah, you can change your FC7 Hornet to an FC7 Hornet Ghost, when we just have to change out the entire paneling of the ship and some components, so we can do that. But it's going to cost you quite a lot of money because it's a very substantial change to your ship.
Right. I think the solution that I had, but aside from those, the two that you guys have put out, I'm fully behind. Definitely would be if the designers are really looking for a way to limit specific ships from tagging on specific things, because they just feel strongly that they can't limit that military components in a X-85 are going to make that one ship way too powerful. Like, I have a hard time believing that. Like, I still think that there should be enough limitations built into stacking one type of module or whatever that doesn't work. But if that's not enough, then do it in game, where if you want to buy the highest end military component that's a type A, then maybe that one is brand specific, and the brand comes with its own specification limitations. So
there's another way to
you're still not undoing the whole thing. But
there's another way to actually limit it. It's like, yes, you can plug in a military grade power plant in your X-85. However, the ship's systems, the power lines in the ship, are not capable of handling that amount of power, so the computer will automatically restrict the output of the power plant to what the ship can actually handle.
Yeah, but that's size.
Sure.
So so I can still put it in,
but not all of them.
I can choose to have a military grade component in there, and maybe it will still give me some benefits, but I can't make full use of the capabilities because the ship has its own limitations in there, because it was never designed to handle a military grade power plant.
Until you take it to a chop shop and get the wiring harness upgraded.
Yeah, but then that's like.
But then again, you're still limiting it by extra time, and you're still limiting it by an exorbitant amount of in-game currency to make that happen. Really,
it's probably going to be cheaper to just buy a Gladius.
We might need to round it off because we're now going back into it. We went from solutions back into discussion.
Yeah. But it's some of the things that came up with, it's like, and they are possible solutions, I would say, to the problem. But indeed, let's just round it off unless anybody has anything else to add.
Well, there's always more, but I'm happy to sign off.
We can talk for hours.
Yeah, we can always talk for hours. We might have some other formats in which we will do that. But I will say this will mark the official end for our podcast this episode. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Salty salute.
I hope you all enjoyed it and that you'll start some more critical but constructive thinking on the matters related to Star Citizen. And that's, of course, not just related to certain things that CIG is doing, but also like just in-game design matters. Think about them and consider them and provide them with constructive criticism and feedback on those kind of things. It will really help developers because they like to know what people are thinking. So do that, please. And of course, like, from our perspective, like, it's our goal is always to make Star Citizen succeed. That's why we are here, and we hope you will be here as well and have that same hope to make this game successful, whether you're a bagger or not. If you did enjoy this podcast, of course, the usual applies, like feel free to share, subscribe, like, and all of those standard YouTube things. Keep in mind, of course, this is a non-monetized podcast. We're not planning to monetize it. We're purely doing this because we love Star Citizen and we want the game to succeed. So this is our way to offer a platform for debate and things like that to happen. If you are interested, down in the information box below, you can find a link to our Discord server, where you can debate ranting Star Citizen or some other general sci-fi things, and also provide us with direct feedback over there or suggestions if you don't want to leave them here on YouTube. And you can also ask us if you're interested in becoming a guest, in which case we can provide you with a simple form to fill out, which will allow us later on to match our guests to the topics that we're debating about. So if you feel really strong about certain things, or really want to talk about those things, you can fill those out in that form. And when we get points that match up with you, we can have a chat with you and decide to include you in one of these podcasts as a guest, because that is our plan, to include a guest each episode. So for now, we have always done 3, and the hope is that from next episode onwards, we will have a guest included in each of them. And that is really all of the end of the information. So I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and I do hope you tune in next time for some more Citizen Situation. Goodbye.
Signing out. Bye, guys.